It's preparing the live stream.
Yep.
It says the meeting is now streaming live on Facebook. That's always a good thing. So what I'll do is I'll just go to my phone for a second or two and see if anybody wants to put any rude comments up and stuff like that. Oh, it says, here we go.
Fantastic. I'm just going to quickly put a shout out as well quickly.
We're both in yellow today then, eh?
I'm not looking at the screen. Hang on. Yes. Well, isn't that funny? I love it when that happens.
I've got like a sun thing on mine.
Have you?
Yeah, that was a race I was in last week.
Oh, wow. Well done. Okay. Going live now with Dr. Joe. See link below. Okay. I am ready.
Right, Louisa, nice to see you. Thanks very much for coming. I put some information about you on the description of tonight's or this evening's episode, if you like.
Yep.
But I'm just going to pick a few bits and pieces up, and I've got no idea, as always. You know, it says here, spirit and destiny, and I think that's what things seem to be coming about these days. Is more and more things are happening. Over which we've got no control, and who would have thought that we'd be in this situation that we're in now, you know? And we've talked, haven't we? We've talked about the state of the world, if you like, and you know, and the influences that are basically influencing people to make choices, whether out of fear and desperation or fearlessness and exasperation.
Yes, and courage. I love courage. Yes, and heart connection.
Yeah, because I think where I'm coming from is, and most people know me, is I've just celebrated 30 years of sobriety. And the way I got out of the drinking and all that sort of stuff, I tried to do myself in because I just couldn't handle what was going on, you know. And what happened to me is around about 1987, which was apparently the point of the harmonic convergence, which I knew nothing about. It's almost like my head opened up and all this information flew in. And I just didn't know what to do with it, you know. And I was at the time I was in a desperate state. There was nobody to talk to, or people I talked to thought I just needed to be in the psychiatric department, which I ended up in a few times, you know. And they didn't understand what I was talking about either, you know, and neither did I, you know. So I was trying to knock my head against the wall to let this stuff out. I was drinking when I had enough money to try and get into oblivion, just to try and get some relaxation, you know. And then somebody introduced me to the way out, basically. And they said to me, and I didn't understand at the time, but they said to me, you need to surrender to the next level or the next dimension. I said, oh, thanks very much for that. How do you do that? You know? And he basically said, look, he said, I'm not a religious person. He said, but this worked for me. He said, so we went through a sort of a process, and he said, this worked for me. He said, I knelt down and I said this prayer. And I thought, oh my God, because, you know, I'm not a religious person. And I thought I'd been sort of nabbed by a cult, you know. And he said, look, I'm not being funny. He said, don't knock it till you've tried it. Right. So I knelt down. I said this prayer, and I'm going to say it again because this is the way it seems to work. And it was this, God. And I thought, he said, say this after me. And he said, God. And I thought, oh, there we go. You know, he said, just say the words. God, I offer myself to thee. To build with me and do with me as thou wilt.
Wow.
Relieve me of this bondage of self, that I may better do your will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. And Louisa, the next morning, I haven't had the drink since. Right.
Yeah.
And I lost everything. I lost my wife, I lost my kids, I lost my job, I lost my liberty, you know, and that was trying off my own power. And somebody said to me, Joe, the problem is you can't access the power that's strong enough to relieve you of this. You have to go deeper and into a different dimension. Now, I didn't understand then. He just said, follow the instructions. I did. It worked for me. And what I've been basically trying to do in my own sort of ham-fisted way for the last 30 odd years is try and pass that same message on, that what you're looking for is deep within you. You don't need to go outside. what you're actually looking for, if you know how to access this inner wisdom, if you like, or intuition, or inner guru, or whatever I nearly said the swear word then.
It's your show.
Yeah. Dr. Effing Joe is gonna try not to swear. But I said that, and since then, every morning, what I do when I wake up, I sort of tap my heart, and I drop in. It's like a thing I do with me breathing. I drop in, and it just more or less say, what's on the cards today? Give us a clue, and I'll try and follow the instructions. Now, I didn't know I was going to say all that, but there you go. Over to you.
Wow, how do I top that? Do you know what? I don't know whether to talk about it astrologically or to talk about my own experience, but from an astrological perspective, what you've described to me sounds very much like what happens when somebody has got a very strong Neptune influence in their birth chart, because Neptune is the planet of, I think, confusion and imagination, and also like our identity. And so often people with a very strong Neptune in your chart, and I would be pretty sure that if I looked at your chart, your Neptune would leap out at me somehow. With Neptune, there's this need to almost dissolve the self, dissolve the ego. It's definitely connected to higher love. And all the charts I've read where people have had an alcohol issue or a drug issue, and in my own chart, I will say I've had experience of definitely abusing alcohol. I've definitely got a past in that, and I've got my own stories about that. But Neptune always stands out. And often what happens is earlier on in our life, we try and lose ourselves with the distraction of drink, drugs, inappropriate sex, anything to excite the senses and help us forget who we are, and the fact that something doesn't feel right in our own experience. And then there's this kind of big letting go. Like Neptune is also a planet that we yield to, and as we yield to it, we kind of go up the emotional scale. And then the best Neptunes, in people that have resolved this kind of dynamic in their charts, they nearly always dissolve the ego in some way. Like, they stop being service to self and they become service to humanity. Their whole ethos changes, and then they merge. So they are dissolving their self, but they are kind of merging with the infinite. The possibilities are infinite. And with that comes that deep joy and that feeling of, that yearning, that feeling that there is something more, appears to be satisfied. And so when I see a strong Neptune in somebody's chart, I think, oh, wow, this person is super sensitive. It's about like sensitivity, and they feel things like an antenna. They pick up on things, don't know how to cope with it early on, and often go down one of those routes to kind of lose themselves so they can forget who they are. And then later, as they learn to deal with those energies and work with those energies, we see really fine people who have kind of given up their need to excite themselves, overly excite themselves, and they just allow themselves to be. They breathe, they work with the energies. And so I see that. And this year we had a really, really big experience of Neptune in the last time this thing happened was 166 years ago, where Neptune and Jupiter connected. And they connected in the sign of Pisces, which is definitely well known for creating Neptune situations where people want to expand. There are no boundaries. You don't know what's yours, what's not yours. And so personal responsibility gets kind of blown out. And so there's these like two planets that don't have boundaries in a sign with no boundaries. And it's a huge heart opening. And, I was saying earlier this year, I think a lot of people are going to either go completely mad with this expansive energy that they can't quite get a grip on. And also, I think there's going to be a lot of people who have these amazing softening experiences where they yield to what is, and they start to see the truth. They determine their truth through their intuition. They start to sense the reality through the medium of their intuition, as opposed to the rationality that we're told. One of the things that I noticed so much about this world, and I think this was the thing that probably led me to mess around with alcohol in quite a crazy way when I was younger, is I always sensed that what I saw in front of me and what I was told was the reality. I always knew that was all Bullshit. Can I say that? Sorry.
Say anything you like. That's
I
very mild for this program.
Yeah. I mean, it's also mild for me, I have to say. I always knew that was a crock. When I was like, sort of, at school, everyone's like, oh, you must go to university. And if you do that, you'll have this great job and you'll work Monday to Friday, have weekends free. Hell, you'll even be able to have 3 whole holidays somewhere exotic every year. And you'll have this great big pension fund. And, this whole thing was described to me and I just couldn't care less about it. It sounded like a prison to me. I just thought, is this really what life is about? As a kid, I was seeing auras around plants, trees. I had this sense of something. And then to be told that the purpose of life was just to get rich and have the best 4-walled house you can, that made no sense to me. It's like, I still struggle with it, even though I would like really nice house to live in. When I consider the reality of life and the conditions of being in this like 3D world of, we have these bodies that age and we need to eat and we need to earn money to be able to pay for it. All of that mundane stuff, it can get me down because my sense of the real reality of the world and the energy and spirit and whatnot, it's about magnificence. And so I have to get out in nature as much as possible. Like today, I've just been emptying out the compost bins, cleaning out our chickens and marveling over life and loving it. We've got this orphan duckling that's 7 days old at the moment. And I've been spending time with the kids and we've been holding him and loving him. And just try and be in the magnificence of it.
I think that's everything that you've said there seems to fit me like a glove, really. I'm 19th of the 3rd, 1955, which is a Pisces.
Yeah,
and
right at the end of Pisces as well.
Yeah, right at the end. So the sort of the last day of the winter, and the start of this sort of thing. I mean, the way I live my life now is I just live one day at a time, because I went to Alcoholics and I was in AA for 9 years and I didn't have a clue what they said, what they were talking about. And they kept saying to me, "You're not ready yet." And I thought, I don't know what you mean. And I had to go out. They said, "Joe, we can sense, that you're still hanging on with your ego and you're a tricky devil." I hated these people because, when someone looks at you and they through you,
Yeah.
Well, that's what they could see because I was ducking and diving and dodging and weaving. And I obviously had to go. I had to reach a place that they called the rock bottom. And the rock bottom is basically the deepest of the darkest of the nights of the soul. Yeah. When you sort of give up and you say, "Look, I've tried absolutely everything here now. Yeah. I can't think my way," because I wasn't stupid. Intellectually, I was doing a PhD. I was doing all these things. Yeah. So from a cognitively competent point of view, I could work things out with my head. Yeah. Except I just didn't have a clue about myself, my emotional self. I'd completely lost contact with my sensations, with my body. I was almost like psychopathic and just like a head on a stick. Because any feelings came in, I'd either swallow them down with drink or just close my throat over and just work from the head. And I could just batter the person from 3 miles away with logic and stuff like that, And that's what they basically said to me. You need to metaphorically decapitate yourself, Joe, because the tricky devil's in your head and the solution's in your heart. And I thought, what are these nincompoops talking about? And that's who I was. And don't get me wrong, the arrogance comes back very quickly, because I used to be a very, very afraid child on the inside, but that switched into one right arrogant, horrible person, and I can feel these two aspects of me coming in now. And I basically have to say to them, in a gentle way, "Oi, stay back behind off. There. Yeah, back off. Shut it. I'm in charge now." Right. And so, when people say you've become egoless, I was told that the ego dies half an hour after you do, and I like that, because it's always there on my shoulder, I mean, it's like, there's like the good angel and the bad angel on my shoulder all the time, But the thing is, because I live a day at a time, I sort of don't listen, because there's a lot of people saying at the moment is the energies are high, the energies are low, they're all dense. This great big solar flux thing is going to happen a week on Tuesday, or it could be in 25 years time. See, so all that stuff is, I was told, Joe, the way to live your life is with faith that your life is managed from a much deeper aspect of who you are. Yeah. Right. And so if you hand your will and your life over to this deeper aspect of you, it's you but it sees more than you. And people call these things oversouls, and then there's a monad on top. I don't get into any of that. I used to, because I would say to myself, oh, I'll learn all this, I'll chuck a word in so do you know where I'm coming from. But at the moment, it's become very simple for me now. I basically hand over my will and my life over to the care of this deeper part of me, which has done a jolly good job over 30 years now, right? Yeah. This deeper part of me, and I say, look, take my whole body, take the way I think, take every single cell of me and use it for the benefit of me, the people around me, and everybody else. Try and help me to be helpful, but I'm not a saint, Louisa. I'm not a saint, you know what I mean? And the thing is, I do that, and then I do what I feel in the day then, because I focus on my feelings first, keep my head out of the way. It's not that I don't use my head, but the information seems to come upwards now rather than going downwards and pushing this down, So that's where I'm up to, And I do believe that there are astrological changes taking place in the universe, or the meta universe, or whatever. I can feel that. I don't exactly know what it is, but all I need to know is, right,
you're going to be okay.
Yeah. Look in front of you, Joe. What do you feel? What action do you need to take now? Do that, and sometimes if I go too deeply into trying to find information out about what's going on planetary wise and globally wise and all that, it can distract me away from the job that I've got to do right in front of me. So when I'm in the flow perfectly, I'm just taking action based upon almost like what my heart's telling me, Now, I work in an environment that's logic based plus, medicine and health, right?
I was just about, do you know what? When you were talking, I was obviously listening, and I was thinking, oh, I must write down medicine, health. I am also put in dentistry and veterinarian, like vets. And I also put in egoless. Now, you've worked in medicine, like you say. Sorry, I just interrupted.
Yeah, no,
the reason why I wrote those down is like what you've described there is what everybody is kind of reared into in the Western world, right from word go. We're expecting, like it's the norm to be rational as a parent, and people are getting more and more rational, to just absolutely listen to medicine. And medicine isn't actually based on the actual person anymore. It's just based on, science, which looks at the mechanics, but like looking at the mechanics of a human being, I think is missing the point. Where's the person? It's not person-centered. Dentistry, not person-centered. Veterinarianism, not animal-centered. It's all just about these kind of arbitrary rules about how things apparently work. But it doesn't include anything about the soul, doesn't include anything about the actual character and temperament of the person or being. I think we've been educated into this system that doesn't respect the beingness of people, and it makes them mad and cranky, and it makes them do really terrible things. I mean, think about our governments, and possibly what exists beyond our governments is this large and dominant voice of rationality. And this is how you have to live. But we are natural beings, and we're being educated out of it right from word go. And I think it's a terrible idea. And, the whole idea of being egoless, I also see the danger of being completely intuitive and going completely down the hippie route of saying, oh, yes, we can be egoless. I'm curious about people who say they are without ego. I know some people, and I actually believe in their experience, they are to the absolute fullness of who they are. But it's not in my experience. And so, I laugh at my ego. I laugh at my personality when it comes up, and I forgive myself for it. And yes, I can look at the astrology, but do you know what? Astrologers are hugely rational people. I'm not quite so, because I blend it with intuition. But a lot of astrologers are deeply, deeply rational, because they're looking at the mathematics, the astronomy, the patterns. And I'm turned on by those patterns. I mean, I love it. I love sensing patterns and seeing things happen. But the patterns without the beingness I think it's a waste of time, because you can draw up a chart for a chicken, the birth of a chicken. You can draw up the chart for the time that a computer was made, and you can draw up the same chart could apply to a person being born. All three of those things are going to express their lives very differently. The computer, no doubt, is going to break within a couple of years because it's designed to break and be out of date in a couple of years. The chicken will, it will last as long as it can according to who's owning it. And if it's owned by me, it's going to have a great life. I love chickens. And the human should have an experience rich with all these different varieties. They've all got the same birth chart. So, approaching astrology as a rationality, just like any kind of thing like medicine, it's a flipping waste of our time and energy. It really is. And it saddens me. And I see the danger of going completely the other way.
Well, I agree, because I teach in postgraduate medical education, right? Yeah. And what I teach is I basically teach consultant physicians and dentists to be nicer people to their trainees, right?
Yeah.
And therefore, to me, it's called student centricity. It's like get away from all the tradition, get away from all the rules and regulations. Why don't you have a heart-to-heart? It's called transactional analysis.
Yeah,
Why
I love transactional analysis. Yeah. I apply it in astrology, funnily enough.
Well, so that's what I'm talking about. And strangely enough, in a couple of weeks' time, I'll be giving a lecture, right, to all these people who teach this, to bring in the Eastern philosophies as well. Because what I've done over the last 30 years is I've looked at Eastern philosophies and the science of beingness, and I've tried to translate it into neuroscience, and I'm becoming more and more successful at this all the time. Because people say to me, I'm a consultant in something called integrative medicine, and people say to me, well, what's that? And I say, well, it's quite simple. It's psycho, neuro, endocrino, immunohematology. And they go, oh, and they don't ask me again. But I say, what we've got is 5 sensors, and we're picking up information from those 5 sensors in various forms of energy all the time. And we're processing them based upon how we've been conditioned, right? Whether in this one lifetime or whether there's some sort of ancestral components that's come through from a long, long time ago. And I say, so we might be in a similar situation, but from a perceptual point of view, we all see things slightly differently. I said, I can say, because once I get going, they can't shut me up, but I can see, I keep bringing neuroscience in it, and they go, oh, that's a possibility. But I say, it's the autonomic nervous system that connects the glands, all the endocrine glands. However, if you go back to the brain, there's 5 senses that come in. But have you ever thought about thinking? You're thinking, that's also sending electrical signals down your nervous system, which are influencing your endocrine glands, which are influencing the secretions in your body and your biochemistry, which eventually impact upon your stem cells that become you. I said, so really, if there's some way, because I have a thing where hacking physiology to change psychology. And what that means is you can change the way your heart works to change the way your head works. It's exactly the opposite way round from applying some new sort of cognitive technique, which is, so it's basically flipping traditional psychology on its head. In fact, it moves beyond psychology into the realm of spirituality. Now, as soon as you work the word spirituality into medicine, they all close off, generally speaking. I have to say, when I say spirituality, I'm talking about your core beliefs, your value system, the things that you hold dear to your heart, and they start pecking up a bit then, It's like, I feel like Oscar Schindler, in the midst of, like an infiltrator, trying to give them a bit of a nudge to say, there's a person in there, what I mean? It's not number 32 with diabetes. It's Billy from Seacombe, right? And so what I'm trying to do in a way is to understand that we need to rehumanize medicine, dentistry, veterinary science, all those things that you mentioned, But I think that there's a way to do it in a balanced way, whereby we can bring it in without causing too many antibody reactions. And Louisa, I'm getting a bit better at being a bit more nuanced and refined about it, because I saw it so clearly. And I used to try and force my opinions on people, and I realized the best way to win it is to bring it in sort of little aliquots, if you like. You know, I've gone on there a bit. I'm sorry about that.
No, it's fine. I completely agree. I mean, a prophet is not known in their own land. You know, if you're in an environment and you start talking about something and people don't have that expectation of you, they won't be open to it. They have to kind of learn it. It has to kind of work synchronistically, you know, as like you are all evolving together. It's very difficult, you know, and so I'm conscious of that when I'm working with my own clients. But with medicine and dentistry and vets, I also see that they're very separate sciences. They're seen as very separate, like, you know, doctors kind of snigger about dentists. They think dentists are kind of slightly less than. And so, you know, when somebody's ill and the doctor's, you know, making these diagnoses, they're not talking to the dentist and asking the dentist to have a look at the teeth and looking at the integrative health of the person, because the teeth will tell you exactly which organ is going on, because that person will have, you know, because everything is connected. And when you're dealing with a pet, they're not talking to the psyche of the owner. Oh, so tell me a bit more about you then. Oh, you've got a depressed dog. Ah, okay, I'm seeing something here. You know, all of these things should come together. And everything is so isolated in its rationality. It's bonkers. It really is. So
I had this conversation with my wife this morning. One of our cats is becoming hypersensitive and really sort of paranoid about people. And she said, I wonder why that is. And I said to her, she's picking that up off you.
Oh, really? I'm blaming it on your wife.
So environmentally, because, you know, she's a rescue cat from Cyprus, you know what I mean? So, but she's becoming more and more sensitive all the time, you know. So it's very interesting. But just to go over the point that you made is medicine, right, and pharmaceutical companies, there are some fantastic medicines available, right, if they're used in the right amount at the right time for the right condition. I know that, you see, and my thing is not to fight anything at all. It's to take the best of both worlds, to combine them together for the benefit of the individual, you know. So I'm not completely against pharmacy and stuff like that, but, you know, there are some things that I don't agree with.
Definitely. There are costs and benefits and decisions, and I think it should be the person's choice. You know, these things need to be made. You know, the patient should still have the control, I think, of what is happening to them. Even, I mean, obviously you can see the greater picture in a way that I can't, because of the environment that you've worked in and studied in. But, you know, even for somebody that might be going mad from a professional perspective, when they're saying you're going mad, they might be having an awakening experience. Now, who has the right and the responsibility to section you or drug you up? I mean, my own experiences, I've been poisoned by my doctor early on. I was given the wrong medication at night in hospital. You know, I lost my voice, my tongue swelled up, all sorts of different things. I've had lots of different run-ins with medicine, but in my early 20s I took Prozac, which was very helpful for me at a time when I wasn't ready to deal with my own issues, and I kept on with that for quite some time. But when I was ready to come off it, I was told, oh no, you can't come off it in one go, you have to do it this way. And my own personal choice in how I managed my mental health was in the hands of somebody else. And I just thought, no, you don't get to make that decision. And yes, I went against what I was advised to do, and I went cold turkey. But at that time, I had an experience where I realized that it's like I was given a holiday from my feelings for about 2 years, which is probably too long, actually. But I'd had a holiday from my feelings, and you know, it had created this artificial high in me and an artificial balance point, and I wasn't really ever feeling any negativity anymore. And then all of a sudden I had this realization that I wanted to feel again, and I was ready to actually really feel some stuff. And because that was my reasoning, I knew that it was right for me to just come off it, and that's what I did. You know, we all need to have these conversations, and where something is stopped, and you're kind of being censored and guided and advised. This should be a conversation. And when someone says, no, this is the way it is, that raises a massive red flag in me.
It does me too. And I'm fortunately in a position where I mark dissertations for doctors and dentists and pharmacists and stuff like that, so I get to see a broad spectrum of the mindsets, so I see that. But the other thing is as well is that because I'm a sort of a senior research fellow in medicine and was for many years, part of my job is to analyze and critique medical and clinical papers, and what I do for a living is, and it gives me some sort of authority, as I say, I do this for a living. I can't find sufficient evidence for what you're telling me. Now, they don't like that, you see, because some of them are maybe doctors and professors of medicine, and I have to say, oh, hang on, Sonny. Well, I don't say that, but that's what's saying in my head, But I'm saying, no, with all due respect, Professor, that's fine. Can you send me copies of the papers that you're talking about here?
Yes.
No, but I'm a professor of medicine and I'm telling you. I mean, I've had stand-ups with them, lots of them and stuff like that. And I won't, you see, Louisa, I won't fall into anything at all unless I feel in my heart. And this is where my intuition comes in. It's my organ of discernment. And if it doesn't feel right for me, I need to find out more information, and I don't just go with my feelings, because I use my abilities as well as a scientific researcher to go and search out the papers. And because I've done it for such a long time, I mean, it's coming up for 50 years now since I've been involved.
A lot of research.
Yeah. I know what I'm talking about, just because I talk in a Scouse accent and stuff like that, which puts people off. One professor said to me, if you want to get anywhere in this field, you'll have to stop using those colloquialisms. Right. So I came away, looked up what colloquialism meant. And it basically, stop talking like you're from Liverpool, because that's not going to do you any favors. Right. Stop using slangs like my head's up my arse and I can't think clearly, and stuff like that. Stop all that and start to talk properly. Well, I tried for ages to say hello and how are you, Henry, and all that stuff. It was stressing me that much. I went back on the drink, so it wasn't very good for me, you see. So I've decided this is the way I talk, It doesn't mean I'm thick, so be careful, Sonny, what you're saying here, because you might get a bit of a shock. But that's what I do for a living now. I'm almost like, and I love this part of me, I love it, an ego slayer. because I had such a massive ego myself and still have, I can smell it in other people a mile off, and there's two things that block intuition in my view. One's fear that blocks the sunlight of the spirit off, and one's arrogance and pride. There's only those two things. And if you like, from a TA point of view, transactional analysis, one's the parent who knows everything, right? And one's the frightened child. But sometimes if the child
you can have the inspired child though, and the nurturing parent, can't you?
Of course, and that's what I try and do, because I seem to have an ability to be able to pick up potential in people that they're not aware of themselves, and it's a sense that I have, and they're sometimes not aware of it. And what I use is I've constructed this program over years called the I Am approach, and it stands for Internal Asset Management. And it's called an asset-based approach, and it means that you home in and focus on the strengths of the individual and work with those until they build sufficient self-esteem and self-worth up to then be able to tackle the problems. However, in the world that we live in a deficit model where we just focus on the seemingly negative, and
the lack of where we are.
Well, absolutely. And we try and work with our non-natural abilities that we haven't got to try and become standardized across the board. And I honestly believe that humanity's way out is through collective individuality. And if we can understand that, if we can understand, and I've called it, democracy's dead in my view. Oh Christ, there we go. I didn't think I was going to get into this, but democracy's dead. And what we need is soulocracy. We need to work from not necessarily consciousness, but conscientiousness, because I think those two things have got to be linked, and that's what I feel so hearty about that and so passionate and that's the message that I'm carrying, is rehumanizing medicine, rehumanizing the world, not to turn your back on anything, but discern, is this healthy or is this harmful? I feel like I'm in the bleeding pulpit now. Sorry about that.
No, I absolutely love it. I love the fact that you call yourself an ego slave. There's a couple of things I want to jog back to, if I may. When you're talking about transactional analysis, I use that when I first work with a client. So just to kind of reiterate, I am an astrologer, and like you were saying, people think I'm thick because I'm a Scouser. Well, people often think, oh, look at a astrologer, what does she know? Head in the clouds, blah, blah, blah. So, part of me, I'm looking at the patterns according to astronomy, actually. But I also studied timeline therapy, neurolinguistic programming, hypnotherapy. I work with all of that. And I'm a good listener, which I think is actually the most important part of my job. So I actually do a really similar thing to you. When you're working with people, you're looking, like you said, to find out these parts of where they're actually really brilliant and they have no idea. These parts that could be the inner hero in them. And so I'm actually looking at their transactional analysis within the birth chart. So Saturn, that's the parent, okay, in your birth chart. The sun, that's your adult self in your birth chart. The moon represents your childlike self. And so I can see by the placements in somebody's chart, the condition of their parent. I can see what their parents were like, but also how they parent and how they talk to themselves. Do they take responsibility? How comfortable are they? Are they really the kind of person that's going to run somebody down, or are they going to run themselves down? With the child, I see, are they a victim? Are they suppressed? Or are they imaginative and creative? Now, most of the time, I can see all of these possibilities in the adult and the parent and the child. And so using astrology, but also listening to the person, I'm looking at their best possible narrative. Essentially, what I do is I try and offer my clients a more inspiring narrative for them to use for their life. Because if they've got themselves this great story about themselves, they start to live up to it a little bit, and they start to dream a bit, and they start to relax a bit. I don't blow smoke up their ass, but I try and, but the transactional analysis is really helpful. Astrologically as well, so there's this psychological concept and it looks like it just sits in academia, and then there's astrology, which looks like a load of old hocus pocus, and yet we use it, and we use it in hypnotherapy as well, and in NLP. It always comes out, these are all interlinked. And it's so funny, when you said, oh, I'm wearing yellow too, it's so funny. I put this t-shirt, this jumper on, this blouse on 5 minutes before I went live with you, and we've both got sky in our background. What are the chances? When I used to deliver training, because before I sort of outed myself as an astrologer, I worked as a business trainer for years, and I used to do these soft skills training and business skills coaching. And I'd have a group of between 10 and 20. And sometimes the group might be 4 or 5 days in, and what we would find is by the end of the group, because we all had this natural rapport, we would all be wearing the same colors, or there'd be a pattern that everyone had. There would be some kind of theme in the way we were dressing. And I think that is evidence of a collective consciousness. You and I, all we did before we came live was just say, oh, let's be really free and open about this. Let's see what happens. And here we are, both wearing yellow with a sky background. I mean, how weird is that? Who tuned into who? I mean, I did my background and my dress later, but I must have picked up, there are these other things going on behind the scenes, and not enough people question it or think, wow, that's a bit odd. What are the chances? I can't even remember the last time I wore this blouse. I've worn it about 4 times. I've had it about 3 years. And I just thought, wow, I want yellow today.
Well, let me tell you a funny story. Before we met a few minutes ago, I had a pink t-shirt on, and I just got go in the bedroom and put the yellow one on. That was about 10 minutes before we met, honestly. So
we were both dressing at yellow at the same time.
Yeah. So I don't know how that works, but let me tell you about the invisible worlds. That's where the feelings are, isn't it? How do you know, you see? And that's what I try and tell people, is that 1/5 of our information is processed cognitively. There's 4/5 going on below the level of our consciousness, right, that we've got no idea about. And it's like completely separate dimensions, worlds, and all this. Now, my first degree was biomedical sciences, hematology, and I was very, very left-brained, scientific. And when I became ill, right, and when I started to sort of wake up a bit, if you like, and stuff, I was reintroduced to the stuff that I loved as a child, which was art and dance and singing and all that, you know. And I was a long time in the psychiatric department, and I was in there a lot of times as well, right? But and the last occasion that I was in there, everything started to really open up. But I was sort of guided by an occupational therapist and a nurse who were very grounded, and they helped me to bring things through. Now, they use something called humanistic psychology, and they use a sort of questioning approach. It's called clean questioning. I use
You've mentioned this before. Remind me what it is. You've mentioned
this. Clean questioning is where you bring a theme in. You say, okay, in your own words, what's the thing that's playing on your mind more than anything else? And they start to explain it. So what they do there is say, and I feel like I'm in chains, right? And what you say then is, what sort of chains do you feel like you're in? And you just shut up then. You don't say, are they heavy chains? Are they light chains? You don't introduce any information, because it's up to them to make meaning of their own metaphors. And as they go deeper, what actually happens is I see it like in my head, like digging away of all the crap in the way, and unearthing stuff, because this word comes to mind all the time, unearthing stuff that's just been buried just below the surface. And as those things start to bubble up in their own words, then the bigger stuff comes up then. So what I help people with is to understand in a mindful way is that they've got to sit with the feeling and not interfere with it. Because what will happen is, because in reality is, it's just a feeling. And to tell somebody that, but you've got to try and introduce it in a very subtle way and a gentle way. So it's a feeling. So I show them breathing techniques, because it's the out breath neuroscientifically that disengages emotions. So when they feel the grip, that means the fight or flight's come in. So they have to breathe it away. Breathe it away. And what that does is, and I'll talk about something in a minute called EMDR, right? And so what that actually does is it disengages from the emotion, and then the feelings start to come up. It's almost like it dissipates then and settles out. What actually happens is all the energy that they've been using to keep it down is put back and recirculated into the system, so they feel more powered. It says clearly, we feel more power flow in. So people aren't, they're not disempowered or lack of power. It's just that it's obstructed stuff. And the reason most people are so knackered all the time is they don't realize that through political correctness, they're keeping hold of what they really want to voice, right? You know, I'm not saying that you should like let it all out and really destroy somebody, but there's a way whereby you can get your heart operating in a certain way, which transforms it, but you can still speak your truth, but it's in a way that's less offensive, because if you offend somebody, they'll go on the defensive and you get back into this battle.
Oh, there is so much I wanted to share with you. Did you hear me giggle while you were talking?
Yeah, of course.
And that would have that could have appeared quite rude. But when you were talking about the clean questioning and how, you say, oh, I feel like I'm tied up in chains, and they don't ask, they don't say, oh, are they heavy chains? They don't describe it. They ask you to come up with it. Well, it's the same in hypnosis. Like early on, like all wannabe hypnotherapists and stuff, they nearly all try and influence the hypnotherapy and say, and there will be this golden light, and this golden light is going to come down, and they describe the sensory environment that somebody's relaxing into. I learned early on when, in my times when I was practicing with people, that I described something and this person jolted awake because it didn't match the experience they were going through. And I was given a really strong, like experience that don't do it. And I was writing down non-interference, just as you said, we don't interfere. I literally wrote non-interference. I really feel like, we began to connect before we actually started the show today, and the connection between us is really big. So I was writing non-interference because, if you want if you want to have influence, and if you want somebody to find their own meaning and get to the real core of things, they have to do it themselves. So like when my kids get upset, because I've got like a 3-year-old, a 6-year-old and a 10-year-old, they're learning to navigate their emotions. And I remember, my parents did the best they could, but I remember what it's like to have people say, no, you're not angry. Why are you angry? Why are you having this reaction? People have their reactions because that's what they're feeling in that moment. And so I absolutely let my kids experience what it is that they need to experience. And actually, it's a bit embarrassing sometimes, because people might look at me and say, what a weak mum, she's letting her kid be really sassy or really this. But actually, I let them feel it. I let them know it. And then when they've felt it fully, they've not been denied it, then I'll have the conversation with them, but only if they're old enough to understand it. Because, a lot of parenting, like there was that woman, what was she called? The something nanny or
I know the one you mean. I can't remember the name.
I can't remember her name, but I hate all this kind of manipulative parenting, the cry it out, let's get them in their sleep patterns so that they can be a good child. That's, that really doesn't fly with me.
Was that the naughty step one?
I mean, it might, if it works for you, fine. I remember how that made me feel in those things, and I don't think it really helped me. It helped suppress me to become this good little girl, and then it's taken 35 years or so. I'm now going to be 48 later on this year, but my mid-30s I started to really unpack, like, why am I acting this way? Why am I behaving like this way? And it's like, oh, because of this shame I've had on me since I was 2 or whatever, So the non-interference is really important. And, there is this habit of telling kids, don't do this at an age when they don't understand it. They've got absolutely no idea what a parent is talking about. So I don't have those conversations with them until I get a sense that they understand what we're talking about.
I couldn't agree more. And there's a great big sort of influx now, and we should be teaching things to children at 2, 3, 4 and 5 years of age.
Yeah.
Right? Before they're experiencing any feelings associated with these things. I know where I'm going with this,
Yeah.
So I think when natural feelings emerge, that's probably the time to try and explain what's actually happening then. But to try and introduce the sort of theoretical input before any sort of emotional input is going to cause a great big schism in my book, and really, again, it's just an academic environment saying this is the best way for us. I mean, academia, really. See, there's an expression, and I don't know if I mentioned this before, but intellect often thwarts intuition. And I know what that means now, because faulty logic can misdirect instinct. And that's what I was suffering from. My logic and what I've been taught and trained in, there were feelings coming up and I was like, oh, I can't have those feelings. And then I'd swallow them down and they'd go into like my left shoulder, and I become like Quasimodo, when really what I was experiencing was going through puberty and having all these feelings, you see, which I've been told, right, where if you have those thoughts and have those feelings, you go into hell immediately. Well, I was immediately going to hell, you see, brought up in a highly strict Roman Catholic environment, all those sorts of things, which basically misdirected and took me away from just natural stuff, and I sort of came out of my shell, if you like, by talking to people who'd gone through the same releasing experience, and just, they weren't dramatic about it. They just said, oh, I went through that, and this is what I learned about myself. They didn't say, you'll be exactly the same. What they did, Louisa, was they shared their experience, honestly, their strength and their hope, that if I sort of look at my own problems in a similar way, that maybe sort of bubbles of understanding would sort of disperse then, and things like that,
What you've described there, I think, is the essence of compassion and kindness. It's allowing people to have their own experience. We like, I mean, you're talking about suppression, and I hope you don't mind me, talking. I feel quite like there's a lot of things I can't talk about at the moment. And so I've been talking about them at home and saying to my husband, oh my God, I can't believe this. And I was going to post something on social media today, and I thought, oh crikey, if I do that, I'm going to get jumped on. And And it's a horrible feeling that right now there are some things you're allowed to talk about and some that you're not. And yeah, it can tie you up in knots. And I've been feeling all sorts of things. I'm not surprised. You know, I've noticed that a lot of people in the last few years have really aged. And I think it's the pressure of feeling we're all going to die. And some people really do believe that. The way I see it is we're all going to die one day. And, so I've tried to let go of that worry. But the pressure of how we're supposed to behave has been really like, oh, it's been really sort of like sandwiched over us. And that's the pressure I think that has created a lot of ill health, and it's been disabling for people. And right now, one of the things that I'm noticing is there's a really strong narrative that you'll catch on the news about the sanctity of life issues. So on the one hand, you know, like this last week has been quite interesting politically in America, in as much that there was a ruling about gun control, and people are saying, you know, we've got to protect the lives of innocents. And then a day later, there's another ruling on abortion. And then people are like, I need my right to, you know, so it's like this, I need to protect we need to protect innocent people. And then the very next day, people are saying, but we need to have choice to be able to end innocent life. And, you know, there's this, you know, I'm not saying that, you know, the fact that I chose those words could offend people, but, you know, there's this whole great big debate about the sanctity of life issues. Like, is an unborn life more valuable than a real life? And, you know, you could go into, and you'll know these arguments from working in psychiatric care. Like if you're saying, like some people say, if a life isn't conscious of itself, then maybe it's not as valuable as a fully conscious life. Where then you could say, well, what about people with Alzheimer's? What about people in comas? What about people here, there, and everywhere? You know, there's lots of alive people that maybe don't have a self-consciousness or awareness. You know, there's all these little intricacies. And right now there's such an extreme narrative about it. And then as a woman, I feel like I'm just expressing myself now. I hope you don't mind. It's like a counseling session, because I feel like I can't talk about this, but having the title of being a woman changed. You know, I've been breastfeeding continuously every single day for 10.5 years, from one son to my daughter to my last son. And I'm intending to do it probably until the end of the year. So it's going to be over 11 years by the time I stop. And to hear people calling it chest feeding and hearing people talking about being a birthing person. I'm a woman. I have birthed I've birthed 3 babies, and I've birthed a couple of miscarriages as well myself. You know, I have the power of creation in my womb to birth life and to birth death, which is another, you know, mind thing to consider. But it feels like the whole the whole subject of being a woman, and I've never felt like a feminist ever, because that has also turned me off. The whole we must fight for our rights, we're equal to men, that's always been a huge turn off to me. But right now I feel like the title of being a woman is being kind of denigrated, because we can't actually talk about our own experiences without having these new euphemisms to make who we are more generic. And that's not to say that I don't support anyone fully, should they want to, you know, and I know people who have become women, who identify as women, but to say that we have the same experiences is not true. It really isn't. They, you know, somebody who wants to be a woman and identifies as a woman, unless they are actually a woman, won't know what it's like to bleed once a month. Won't know what it's like to go through the menopause. There are actual fundamental differences. And so it just feels like there's all these different things. And why can't we talk about it now? I think there's a lot of things, you know, it's interesting to always look at what you're allowed to talk about and also look at what you're not allowed to talk about. And that says a lot about who has the power. And so I'm really right now, I've been feeling this bubble up. And so I'm glad you've given me the chance to get that off my chest. And I hope I haven't offended anyone, because that's not what I mean to do.
I think, no, I welcome that very much indeed, because I had this conversation this morning with my wife about, if you say to somebody, right, so there's a theme, okay? If you say to somebody honestly, how do you see this, Louisa? And what's your experience? And they share their honest experience and how they see it. Then that's it done. Then it's out on the table. Now the person sitting next to you or next on it might have completely and utterly the opposite opinion, and yet still it's out on the table. And I think when everything's out on the table, right, there's a different picture emerges and evolves. Then, you know, so the problem in my view is that one person is so strong in their feelings, when they start to try and chuck it down the throat of somebody else, that's when it becomes a real problem. Then, you know, so that's my view, is how do you see it? And it gets back again to the clean questioning, clean communication. It's because marketing, as you know, is a way to see and to be able to sneak in and influence people mostly below the level of their consciousness. But as you know, it comes down to a simple thing: honest communication. This is the way I see it. Now, I may say something here that triggers you. I've been taught that if I feel emotionally disturbed, it's because I've taken the bait. And what I have to do then is I have to look at, there's a judgment in me that's just judge what that person said. What is it in me that I have to learn about me because I've been triggered? So they don't trigger you. It's you take the bait from what they've just said. You know, so I agree with you. And I think that we should be able to discuss and talk and lay onto the table, right, anything at all to do with humans at all. You know, and if somebody wants to be, I mean, because they'll bring in then, won't they? They'll bring in the medical debate and the biology debate, and then they'll bring in the psychology debate. Well, I think that we can transcend all that. We can go into spirituality where there's no male, there's no female, there's no body, there's no nothing. There's just pure consciousness. And I think if we look from that point of view and then siphon it down then and see what the best way forward is, it's about being honest, open and transparent. I just want to say this: transparency and translucency aren't the same thing. There's a lot of translucency goes on, but there's a lot of stuff that's actually diffracting the truth and the light. And I think all those filters are coming off now. And what I see is a great big shift as this truth vibration trundles in faster and faster.
Yes, absolutely. I love how you answered that as well, because actually when we do look at it from different levels and when we are allowed to have those conversations, then real transformation can happen, because we can see things from other people's perspectives. And to reduce a perspective, it stops the conversation straight away. Now, you were talking earlier about, you know, how we can be honest and transparent. And I really like the work. I don't know if you know Brad Blanton. He wrote this book ages ago called Radical Honesty. And it's about how to be radically honest and stick around to clear up the mess. And I have to say, at the time I was like, oh my goodness, because I just met my husband, who was then just my partner. And he said, I want us to do the first few exercises in this radical honesty thing that he recommended for partners. And oh my goodness, it made me so vulnerable, you know, or I felt very vulnerable, to own my language. But like one of the exercises was to talk about every single partner and sexual experience we'd had. And I was thinking, crikey, what's the whole purpose of that? And I felt very uncomfortable, because I suspected I might have had more partners than my husband that was 10 years older than me. You know, I was a bit embarrassed. And actually the whole purpose, what Brad Blanton says, because he's actually a psychologist, you know, so he's somebody who's worked with broken people all his life, or people who feel like they're broken and who can't make sense of what's going on. And what he said was, blame, shame, guilt and anger, they undermine everything. And what is shame? It's something you hide. What is blame? Well, it's a judgment about somebody else because you can't have the conversation. What is anger? And he kind of went through these things. And so he's created these exercises that we could all do. And it gave my husband and I a very uncomfortable weekend, but a really useful framework, because actually I answered everything honestly, and I'm pretty sure he did too. And there were some other exercises, but we made ourselves very vulnerable because we were absolutely radically honest. And I realized that when we went to that level of honesty, it could have opened up a can of worms, and it could have really backfired. But the whole purpose of it, and he gives you a framework for it, is like, you know, you are really honest about it, but you stick around And so what I learned from it was really, it's okay to be vulnerable. And because of that, we developed a really strong trust that and when you've gone through that experience, you know in your heart of hearts, it absolutely doesn't matter what I tell my husband. It doesn't matter. I can trust that I can tell him the most awful things about myself, how I'm feeling, and we can stick around. And so far, you know, we've been together 11 and a half years. So we didn't hang around to have our first child, put it that way. In fact, I was pregnant already when we were doing this exercise. So really, you know, up to the ante, I have to say. I was really upset about it. But, you know, it's really helped us. And I don't think Brad Blanton's particularly likable. Actually, he ran for Senate in America quite a long time ago. And where he's so radically honest, you know, people like journalists were saying, tell me about your policies. And then they were saying, so have you ever had drugs? Have you ever had extramarital sex? Have you ever done this, that, and the other? Knowing full well he was going to be honest. Of course, all the other senators are up to their eyeballs in it, you know, and, you know, he answered everything honestly. And of course, you know, they used it against him and he wasn't taken seriously. But I love his spirit in eliminating shame, get rid of the shame, and miracles can happen.
See, that's basically the process I went through to get deep down and clear all the stuff in me. And that's called the 12-step program of recovery of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I went and wrote down a complete inventory of everything that I was ashamed of, everything that I could remember that I'd done, you know, and there was some horrendous things as well. And I shared this honestly and openly with somebody I didn't know. I'd only met a couple of times, you know, and this was where I really reached the point of, if you like, humility then. And this, he said at the end of it, he said, is there anything at all that you haven't shared with me that you're going to take to the grave with you? And I honestly searched my whole soul, being, everything, and there wasn't anything, right? And then I took the list, because I had to do a list and everything, and I was desperate to be rid of all this stuff. And so we took the list and we went out and we ceremonially lit it, and it went off. And then I got another one of those feelings, and when I went home that night, I sat on my bed and a voice said to me, and I thought, oh God, there we go. But it was a voice outside of myself, but inside of myself. And it said, Joseph, we love you. Right. And I said, that's very, very nice. I said, but F off and come back in the morning when it's light, you know. And then I fell into a deep sleep. And when I got up again, it was another dimensional shift, if you like. I got up again in a completely different world, you know. So clear-sightedness, clairvoyance, all those different things happen to me. There's so many different things, but we've come to time, old chap.
Yeah.
So I love talking to you.
A lot, haven't we? We've
well,
so much.
And I think now you're right, because the truth will set you free. But the sword of truth, it's got two sides to it, isn't it? It's like, you know, it hurts like hell when these things are being cut off, but it frees you at the same time. And I think the bondage of self really is the emotional attachments we have to the guilt, to the shame, to the remorse, to all the anger, all that. But most of it is below the level of our consciousness. And I never started to grow up until I took my eyes the other way around and started to look in and start to be honest about it, you know. And it's almost, there's a phrase that says that you're only as sick as your secrets, you know.
Ooh, that is, I love that. I've got to write that down.
I didn't make that up. That's come from somewhere, you know, probably in AA and stuff like that. But you're only as sick as your secrets. And from my point of view now, because I do energy and energy work and stuff like that, there's always a part of you holding down that sort of, and these secrets are buried alive. They're buried alive. And what they mean is that it takes energy in us to keep them where they are, because we're afraid for them to see the light of day. Well, I think a rock bottom is where a person becomes desperate enough to be able to let go of that and say, look, I've got to spill the beans. And you know what, Louisa, when they're coming out, they're just, I had a friend, he used to say, it's like pole vaulting over mouse turds. That's how important they really are. Yeah, but when they're in you, they're like mountains that you have to climb, you know.
Yes.
And then what happened to me was then I realized then I wasn't the only person in that position, that many, many people have gone through that. And I think once you start to get identification, not with the same as, but very similar to then you no longer feel alone. You can work more with people. You don't feel so isolated and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So there we are. That's my experience. And is there anything else still hidden in me? I've got a black thing on my tooth there. I don't know what that is. Is there anything else still hidden in me? I've got no idea, but I don't care because
We don't know what we don't know.
I'm not consciously holding on to anything. Yeah. But if something comes up, I've got like 5 people I can ring up to say, this has come up. They'll say, well, what is it? Right. Right. I'll share it with them. They won't offer me any advice. They'll say, is that it? Good night. You know, and then it's out and gone. There's so many things I'd love to talk to you about. Well, we'll have to do this again.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, now you've got a 6th person you can also call, because I've actually got your date of birth, which you gave me, so I can have a look astrologically for you.
Okay.
Well, so there might be nice there as well.
No, smashing. So thanks very much for coming on. And
thanks for having me.
Can you put some of your I'm sure people will want to contact you after this. Can you put some of your contact details in the chat afterwards and stuff?
Yeah.
I'm not fishing for business at the moment. I'm too busy.
No, I'm not either. But I know. But I'm really happy to help out where I can. So yeah.
Lovely. Well, thanks very much, and may the force remain with you forever and ever. And hopefully speak to you soon.
Thank you so much. Bye. Ciao.